Hello and welcome to your Instructional Tropical Aquarium Guide. I'm Paul Talbot. I'm going to teach you all little tricks of how to keep a successful tropical aquarium like these ones. No matter what it is you're after, there'll always be something that suits you, whether it be a small aquarium like this one or an even large one like that. What we really want to encourage you to do is learn as much as possible about the animals which you wish to keep, because there really is something that's going to suit you. But having more information about the ones that you select really is the key, because we need to know that some of these fish are going to grow very large, some of them are going to grow quite small, some of them are going to eat plants, other ones are not going to eat plants. So the more requirements we understand about the fish we're keeping, the more likely we're going to have success with them. Now, once upon a time, people would go into the aquarium shops, they would ask various questions, they'd get pretty much the sort of information that they'd need to know, but the problem is we tend to forget. Human memory retention is 20%, which means you go in, you learn pretty much what you need to know, you go out, and then you still wonder why your fish die. We also used to try and sell books to people, but we find that people just don't have the time to read the books, and even if they do read them, once again, they just forget a lot of the information. That's why we produce this series. Now, particularly if you're new to the hobby, I really suggest watching it through several times, because hearing it and seeing it several times over is really going to help you remember it. So really take advantage of some of the beautiful tanks that you're seeing during this program. If you notice any beautiful features which may have been utilized in one of these tanks, use those ideas for your own aquarium. What a lot of people will do, even get dead corals and create an environment which looks very much like a saltwater aquarium with bright yellows, bright blues, bright oranges. Looks very much like a marine aquarium, but it's actually African cichlids. Now, a lot of people will do this. This is very popular if you want that very marine look with gorgeous colors, but you don't want the effort to look after them. Now, I'm going to walk you through all the steps for setting up the aquarium, everything from filtration, lighting, heating, water parameters, information on breeding these fish. You'll find that you can breed them and grow the young up quite easily, and then you can sell those babies off to the stores. Now, they'll usually want to swap them for a credit If you swap them for cash, you don't typically get as much for them, but if you swap them for a credit, then you can upgrade the types of fish that you're keeping and broaden your experience with these fish. No matter what size or style of house you've got, you always have room for an aquarium, particularly if you're inventive enough. During the course of this video, you'll see some very interesting aquariums, both set in walls and made of parts of other pieces of furniture. Providing that you're creative, you'll be surprised what ideas you too can come up with. During various phases over the years, aquariums have developed a bit of a reputation as being hard to look after. In general, it's not that they're hard to look after, it really is the lack of information which has been available to people. So I really want you to understand, keeping a fish tank is easy, providing that you have the right information. So it's just like getting in a car and driving the car, and then the car breaks down and you say the car was no good. It's maybe that you didn't have the understanding to put the petrol in the car or to change the spark plugs in the car. So what I'm trying to say, keeping a fish tank is very, very easy to keep, providing you have the information. So you really want to look at what fish you're going to purchase and compare that with how prepared you are to look after them. So if you want a hobby, you want to be involved in your aquarium, you want to be learning about it and actually maintaining it, then these sorts of elaborate planted aquariums really are an option. On the other hand, if you want a piece of furniture, you want something that you can set up and have fish that almost come with a warranty, that almost never die, you're really better off going for fish like the cichlids, which are much longer lived and hardier fish. Now, tetras over the years have given community fish quite a bad reputation, because the tetra in the wild is usually pretty much an annual fish, which means it lives, it grows, it breeds, it dies pretty much within 1 year in the wild. So when people buy them at the aquarium shops, maybe they're 6 months old when they buy them, then they keep that fish for 3 to 6 months, and then they find that most of them are dead, and they're pulling their hair out thinking, well, why do my fish keep dying? This is not a good hobby. When maybe it's just the type of fish they're purchasing. So it is important to understand the lifespan of the fish you're keeping. A lot of your tetras and things live for about a year. In the aquariums, we do hear stories of them living for 2 years or plus, but in general, understand if you're keeping small fish and they're not living for overly long periods of time, maybe that's just the species that you're actually keeping. Then with most of your live bearers, like your platies and your mollies and your guppies, most of those are pretty much biannual fish, which means they'll live about 2 years in the wild. So if in your aquarium they're living 2 or say 3 years, and then they're dying after that, old age really is an issue, especially with these smaller fish. With the very large gouramis and things, you hear stories of them living 12 or 15 years or plus. That just really isn't the case with the smaller fish, because they do tend to be more delicate and their life just isn't as long. But aquarium really is relaxing. It's been said that if you look at the aquarium for 15 minutes a day, you're actually able to lower your stress level by 40%. Not only are they a great pet, but it really is the ultimate piece of furniture too, and it's heaps cheaper than water views. People spend millions of dollars to get a block of land to look at the water, and I say, well, hey, you get a window, you get to look in the water. You really will find that keeping aquariums is a really addictive and contagious hobby. You'll find that when you first get involved in it, you're so excited about it, you don't stop talking about it, and you'll actually get a lot of your friends into it as well. But information is everything. Exchange information with your friends. Talk about, learn about, because you'll find the more you learn about this hobby, the more success you'll have and the more you'll enjoy it. I really encourage that you use the chapters of this guide and try to understand the principles behind each one of those chapters, so it arms you with the information to ensure that you too can have beautiful tropical aquariums like these ones. When selecting fish to go into your aquarium, it really is quite important that you understand how appropriate this fish is for the aquarium that you've got. So if you've got a small aquarium such as this one, it's really important that you don't go getting species of fish that grow too large, because it's quite cruel to keep fish that grow large in small aquariums, even though they will stunt. So if you've got a small aquarium and you put a fish in it that actually grows very big, the fish will actually have a stunted growth. So somewhat like I guess you could say a bonsai fish, because the fish produce pheromones and pheromones stunts the growth of the fish. So with the smaller aquariums, you really are restricted to the smaller fish. On the other hand, if you've got a very big aquarium such as this one, you're really less restricted. You've got so many options for various fish to put into the aquariums because of the sheer size of this tank. What I would suggest doing if you're a beginner is to keep a list of the fish that you keep. Therefore, when you go to consult your aquarium expert at your local aquarium shop, you can bring the list with you, allowing them to advise you what sort of fish are likely to work with your aquarium. The first thing to consider is how aggressive the fish are. Obviously, if you put a fish into your aquarium that's more aggressive than the fish you've got, it potentially could kill some of the fish in your aquarium. As well as that, if it's not aggressive as your fish, then it may get killed by the fish in your aquarium. When you're introducing the fish, this really needs to be considered. Also, the pH of the aquarium. You don't want to keep an acid type aquarium and go putting in a fish that prefers alkaline pH, otherwise the chances of it getting sick is of course very high. Also consider the amount of salt that they advise that you put into the water and the types of food that you should be feeding them. Understand what it is that you feed your current aquarium and make sure that it's acceptable diet for the new fish that you introduce. Most fish are opportunists, so any large fish will more than likely eat small fish. So there's a, I guess, size of mouth rule, where even if it's a large peaceful fish, even a goldfish, if it's got a mouth large enough to eat your small fish, you can almost guarantee it's probably going to end up there. So with this combination of fish, while they're small, they all will tend to get along. On the other hand, as they grow up and personalities develop, you can have one aquarium with this same mix of fish and all the fish can seem to get along with no problems whatsoever for years. On the other hand, you can have another aquarium which has basically the opposite result, where some of the individuals become quite aggressive and may attack some of the other species. It's really important to monitor and watch this as it's occurring. Now, generally it'll be one instigator that will cause most of the aggression and problems in your aquarium, because the key is the dominant fish. If you've got a dominant fish in the aquarium which is acting slightly aggressively between most of the fish and exerting its dominance and interrupting or breaking any fights that break out between the fish, then you'll find that the fish will grow up well. On the other hand, if you've got a less observant or, let's say, not as good boss, then in general there can be a lot more problems with aggression, because that boss will usually be overridden and a lot of aggression can occur in the aquarium. Every aquarium will have a hierarchy. There'll be the boss, then the second boss, then all the way down to the biggest wimp. Now, the boss's job should be to control the rest of the fish. If this is working properly, then the hierarchy of the aquarium should not change. On the other hand, if the boss is not controlling the rest of the ranks and hierarchy is changing, you will result in a lot of aggression being in the aquarium. So how aggressive the aquarium is governed by how many fish are in the aquarium, what type of fish are in the aquarium, and who the boss of the aquarium is. One of the easiest things to remember is that the younger the fish, the more compatible it tends to be with its tank mates. On the other hand, as the fish get older and get used to their ways and used to the fish they've grown up with, they tend to be less compatible with other tank mates. In some circumstances, various fish work, and in other circumstances, those same fish just don't work. For example, fish like silver sharks, mono angels, clown loaches, scats, various sucker fish will work in one aquarium and simply not work in the other aquarium. It's really a matter of trying your aquarium and seeing how yours react to that style of fish. In general, the larger, the less compatible it is with other tank mates. If you have a, for example, large Maboona or large type of African cichlid and try and introduce it with other fish, there's a much lower chance of that fish getting along, because it's grown up and become accustomed to its territories, its tank mates, and is generally less able to adapt to a new environment and is more likely to be irritable and aggressive than a smaller one, not unlike humans. So in this aquarium, I'd be watching the silver sharks and the loaches as being the more peaceful fish that may get picked on. On the other hand, I'd be looking at things like the red scats and the mono angels as potentially being the more aggressive ones. The colour and effect can look strongest if you pick a few types of fish that you like, particularly if you like the electric yellows. Get quite a high number of the electric yellow, because when they're all together, that unity is really quite striking, and that high presence of yellow will look quite powerful in the aquarium. Now, when buying the aquarium, try and make the aquarium as long and as wide as possible to increase the surface area of the water. Try not to purchase tall, thin aquariums with small surface area, because the amount of surface area the aquarium will have directly relates to the amount of fish you can have in the aquarium. So many times people will buy an aquarium from the store and it either wasn't quite what they were after, or it doesn't look quite as big once it settles into the home. So make sure you buy the tank as big as possible. Also, try to have your filtration as big as possible, because in general, larger filters are more versatile and they can handle a larger bio load, which is the amount of stock in the aquarium. So large filters and large aquariums generally reach a lot less regret. Though the standard models of aquarium sizes and colours tend to be cheaper, don't forget that an aquarium is a long-term investment. So don't be afraid to get a custom aquarium. Though they're a little bit more expensive, it's really important to get something that suits your home style and purpose. Make sure you put a lot of thought into the positioning of your aquarium. You want to try and keep it away from any major thoroughfares, like hallways are not the best idea, away from slamming doors, and definitely direct sunlight. Try to keep the aquarium away from direct sunlight, because that's going to encourage algae problems and possibly temperature problems. A corner like this is absolutely perfect. Make sure under any aquarium that you always have polystyrofoam. Now what this does is take up any irregularities in your stand. No matter how flat you think your stand is, make sure you have the polystyrofoam. Now this filter is run off an overflow principle. So what happens is you've got the filter down the bottom, it blows water up via a pump into the top of the aquarium, which overflows the aquarium via a hole, which returns the water down into the filter again. Now there's various different ways to take the water from the aquarium down into the sump. There are overflow chambers that people make in the corner of the aquarium. I think that the least obvious is just simply a hole in the back of the aquarium. If you want the water level relatively low, you'll put the hole down lower, remembering that if you're pumping a lot of water up, you'll need to make sure that this hole is low enough to accept the amount of water which is outputted by the pump. It really is important to have good filtration on your aquarium and understand how this filtration works. There's heaps of different filtration available, everything from internal box filters, under gravel filters, internal canister filters, hang-on filters, external canister filters, trickle filters, and other types of sump filters. A lot of them are very effective. The most important thing is to have filters which are big enough for the capacity that you need, and to make sure that you understand how to use them properly. It's really important that you're happy with the position of the aquarium, because now we're going to fill it with gravel, decorations and water, and there's no way you'll be able to move it once it's completed. So now it's time to fill up the tank. You'll be surprised how long it takes to fill up a big aquarium like this one. In general, the higher the aquarium, the more light the aquarium will require. As an absolute minimum, we do suggest an 18-inch high tank that we have 1 row of fluorescent tubes. A 2-foot high tank will have 2 rows of fluorescent tubes. If you do wish to grow plants in the aquarium, we do suggest to double that amount of lighting, and if you do want to take the plants seriously, you might even want to consider metal halide lighting. Okay, now you've got your hood on your aquarium and you've finished your initial setup. You've got plenty of aeration, your filtration's going, you've got your heaters on and you're waiting for them to get up to 25 degrees on your thermometer. Next is to check the pH and make sure the pH is adequate for your fish. We tend to encourage at least a double dose of water ager to make sure there's no chlorine in the water. So your temperature's right, your pH is right, we've added plenty of water ager, add some salt. Tend to use about 1 teaspoon per 5 litres, and there's plenty of good brands available. Follow the recommendations, then you're ready to get your fish. It's really important you've got a good set of glass lids over the top of your aquarium, because even through the tiniest gaps, it's always your favourite fish that jumps out. Now when positioning rocks in your aquarium, what you're aiming to do is to try and minimise how much of the rock touches the gravel. So if you've got a large rock and it takes up that much room, all the detritus will build up around the outside and underneath the rock. Whereas what you want to aim to do is to try and put the rock on points so then there's a much smaller area touching the gravel. So you can use the glass or you can use other rocks to anchor each other off to try and elevate the rock as much as possible. Now, I typically will pick up a rock, place it in the water, roll it around in my hand and look for the most interesting feature of the rock and try to make sure that the most interesting feature is getting used best to its advantage. So you're trying to make as many caves, you're trying to create as much elevation, as many little holes where the fish can swim in and through. Try not to create contact with the surface as much as possible, and you should be able to decorate your aquarium beautifully. When selecting the gravel for your aquarium, you've got many choices. Things like the coral sand is only appropriate for fish that are going to have a very high pH, like the African cichlids. On the other hand, a 1 to 3 mil normal pebblecrete is generally what I'll recommend. There's brownish, reddish, blacks, whites. I do find that if you've got a pale coloured substrate, the colour of the fish will tend to be more pale as well. On a slightly darker substrate, the fish will bring out a more predominant pigment, stronger colour. I'll also find that if the substrate is too dark, that will promote the fish to become quite dark as well. So I'll generally like a reddy, brown type natural looking pebblecrete. Generally 1 to 3 millimetre is perfect for the rocks. If you have rocks that are 5 millimetres or above, you find that it harbours too much detritus, and what happens then is the detritus falls into the gravel as opposed to landing on the gravel. If the gravel is fine, as in 3 millimetres or 1 millimetre gravel, the detritus will land on it where the fish can sift through it and pull any excess nutrients out of it. In this particular case, you can see that the sand is really dirty underneath. You can see that the fish are sort of tossing it around at the top, but you've got a lot of gunk filling up underneath. It would be really advisable to do a gravel clean on this gravel a bit more regularly to make sure that you don't get bad types of bacteria, anaerobic bacteria forming underneath this gravel. On all circumstances, I recommend that you keep your gravel as thin as possible, because when it does start getting thick like this, the amount of gunk that's building up in it does lower your water quality and does encourage the growth of anaerobic bacteria which discharge hydrogen sulfide which is a toxic acid into the aquarium and is actually capable of killing your fish. The only time you'd have a thick bed of gravel is if you wanted to grow plants, because they'll need that for their roots. So when you do a gravel clean, don't clean around the very base of the plant, otherwise you're going to damage the roots of the plant. In a cichlid aquarium, keep your gravel as thin as possible, because cichlids don't really work with plants anyway, because the pH is too high, so therefore a thin bed of gravel is very important. Another very popular decoration for a tropical aquarium is driftwood. Driftwood looks very natural and can enhance many aquariums. The only disadvantage of the driftwood is it actually releases tannic acids, which will often cause a tea colour to the aquarium, which can look quite undesirable. The easiest way to remove these tannins is using activated carbon. Place the activated carbon into the filter, and providing you've got enough carbon, it'll suck these tannins out of the water. Also be aware that what the driftwood is releasing is actually tannic acids, so it will soften the water, so therefore lowering the pH. So anytime you're using driftwood in the water and you want the pH to be neutral or alkaline, you may need to buff the water to compensate for the tannic acids which are produced by the driftwood. There's really two common approaches for keeping plants in the aquarium. One is buy a variety of different plants and find out which ones suit your aquarium, or you can set your aquarium up for the requirements of various plants. Now remember that no aquarium is really going to suit all different types of plants. Just the same as if you get a pot plant and you put it in your backyard, maybe that pot plant will thrive in your backyard, whereas it won't work in your friend's backyard, where the conditions seem to be quite similar, but in one area it will work and in one area it just won't work. So trying a variety of different types of plants and seeing which ones suit your tank is really the easiest. On the other hand, having basic understanding of what plants require usually mean that you'll be able to keep a wider range of plants, like understanding that light tubes age. Generally 6 to 9 months of a light tube, and you usually want to replace it because the gases in the light tube actually burn out and lose intensity and spectrum. So if you don't have adequate intensity and spectrum, some plants simply won't grow. Then also understand gravel fertilization. So what you'll normally do is put fertilization through the gravel, because in the wild there's a higher nutrient level in the gravel as opposed to in the water. So then the nutrients will passively diffuse up through the roots into the leaves. So putting fertilization through the gravel will definitely help your plants and increase the amount of iron in the water. Some plants respond better to some fertilizers compared to others. So it really is a case of trial and error, because different plants do respond better to different amounts of fertilization, amounts of light, and amounts of CO2 in the water. So if you have an aquarium with a lot of aeration, with not many fish, and a lot of plants, you might find your plants tend to suffer because there's not enough carbon dioxide in the water. On the other hand, if you have lots of fish and lots of plants, that probably won't so much be the case. And then on the extreme, if you have heaps of light over the aquarium and your demand for CO2 is very high, you can even think of using things like CO2 injection units, which will actually put CO2 into the water. So what I'm really saying is experiment with lighting, carbon dioxide and fertilizer to see what results you get out of the plants that you wish to keep in the aquarium. One really simple little key if you want to keep plants: don't keep fish that eat plants. There's so many varieties of fish that will actually eat the plants, and be wary of any snails which are going to eat the plants as well, because you could have a beautifully well run planted aquarium, drop something like a silver dollar in it, and then he'll go around and mow up the plants quicker than you can believe. So when you've got a planted aquarium, you really want to watch the fish that you go in. Ask before you buy them, does this fish eat plants? Because if it eats plants, the effects could be quite disastrous. Also be aware that a lot of the plants which are commercially available are actually not true aquatic plants. So therefore you take them home and they don't live for a relatively long period of time. If you want to have success with your aquarium, it is important you do get true aquatic plants, so then they have hope from the start. Also, the more plants you have in the aquarium, in general, the easier the plants will be to actually keep, because the more competition the plants will be against algae, because the nutrients, the photosynthetic nutrients which are available in the aquarium, will be absorbed by the plants instead of being available for the algae. For gas exchange in an aquarium, you've got two options. One is vertical gas exchange, meaning that you're using an air stone and putting bubbles into the aquarium. So therefore the bubbles come up and the bubbles pop at the surface, which allows gas exchange, so the gas to exchange from the water to the atmosphere. Or you've got horizontal gas exchange, which means you've got a pump in the aquarium and the pump is shooting the water, and it's shot as such that the surface agitates. So if you want to keep a planted aquarium, horizontal is better, so therefore you're shooting water across the top of the aquarium and agitating the surface of the water. That tends to release less CO2 than your vertical. If you do choose to use vertical gas exchange, so air bubbles, and you've got a lot of plants in your aquarium, you're normally better off running your air stone at night time. So your plants are producing the oxygen during the day, and then the air stone is providing your oxygen at night time, so the fish don't run out of oxygen, while still allowing you to maintain carbon dioxide levels in the aquarium for the plants. Now let's talk about temperature and lighting within an aquarium, because there's different positions in your home that you can put the aquarium which will experience different conditions of temperature and lighting. So don't be afraid to experiment with the different types of tubes that are available on the market to put over your aquarium, because each circumstance is different and will portray different colours within your aquarium and your fish. There's all different types of aquarium tubes on the market. There's Biolux tubes, which really enhance the colour of the fish. There's high intensity full spectrum tubes, which really illuminate the whole aquarium. There's actinic tubes that give the blue effect. So it's worth looking at the different types of tubes available and experiment particularly on your aquarium and see which ones you like the look of and which ones bring up the colour of your fish. So not only do I want to encourage that you experiment with the amount of light you have in the aquarium, also taking into consideration any sunlight that it might receive, I also want you to be aware of the duration of the light for the aquarium. We're really after consistency, so if you experiment with how long your light's on, between 8 to 12 hours, if you find you're getting a fair bit of algae in the aquarium, it can be worth cutting the light down. If you find that your plants are just not growing well enough, usually we'll encourage that you increase the amount of light in the aquarium. But generally 10 to 12 hours is what you're looking for on a consistent basis for a planted aquarium. In general, you don't have a lot of plants in a cichlid tank, so therefore try to have the lights on mainly only when you're viewing it. So if there's no one home, you tend to have the lights in the aquarium off. It doesn't harm or worry the fish at all. Try to reduce the amount of direct light to the tank. So if there's a window that's beaming the light straight into the tank, try and make sure that the window is closed, particularly when you're not home. So if you do have plants in the aquarium, you probably want a minimum of 8 hours light, a maximum of 12 hours light. If there's no plants in the aquarium, we want to have the lights on mainly while you're viewing them. Now there's plenty of commercially available heaters which are quite effective. All you need to do is set the heater before you put it into the aquarium and have a thermometer to check that the thermostat in the heater is running correctly. You'll generally run your aquarium at around 25 degrees, but if you do want to promote breeding or grow the fish a little bit fast, get the temperature up to 27 or 28 degrees. So the temperature being too cold really shouldn't be an issue, providing that you have a good quality heater that's generously sized for the aquarium. Then your only concern is that the aquarium doesn't get too hot. Make sure that you don't position the aquarium in too hot or stuffier conditions. If the temperature of the aquarium does go above 30 degrees, you may even need to get a fan and blow it across the surface of the aquarium just to cool the water, because above 30 degrees can be fatal for some fish. Now that you've got the aquarium ready, you've got your filtration and your aeration running, you've got your temperature and your pH right, it's time for the fun bit, which is to get the fish. The fish will typically come from the aquarium in a bag like this one. Make sure that there's plenty of air for the amount of water in the bag, because they don't run out of water, but they do run out of air. If you're going to be traveling for more than a couple of hours, it's good to insist that they put some oxygen in with the air in the bag, and that'll give you up to a couple of days. Once you get your fish home, you're going to have to acclimatise them, which is to adjust the temperature in the bag to the temperature in the aquarium. So float the unopened bag in the top of the aquarium for about 15 minutes. If your aquarium is well established and you've got some very dominant fish in the aquarium which act very aggressively towards new introductions, it's a really good idea to totally rearrange your rocks. This will break up all the current territories in the aquarium, confuse and disorientate the fish that are currently in there, and they'll spend more time trying to find themselves a new territory that they want to rule, as opposed to targeting the new fish that have come into the aquarium and focusing on them and venting their aggression on them. This will disperse the aggression amongst all the other fish in the aquarium. Now that the bag's been floating for about 15 minutes, you open the bag up and roll it open. It's really important that you don't just fold the bag over the top of the aquarium. Many people lose fish doing this because the fish will be gasping and stressed at this stage and will be using a lot of oxygen, which won't be able to be replenished within the water because you've choked it off like that. The correct method is to roll the top of the bag open, trying to maximise the amount of surface area in the bag in which the gas can exchange. It's a good idea to test the water in the bag that your fish are coming from. If you're getting your fish from a reputable dealer, the pH should be fairly similar to that of your aquarium, because you should be keeping your aquarium at the same pH that your fish require, so that really shouldn't be a problem. On the other hand, if the fish have been in transport for a long period of time, the pH in the bag can actually fall. So if the pH of the bag is different to the pH of your aquarium, you need to adjust the pH of the bag slowly. So simply get a glass of water, pour it into the bag with the fish, and leave that for a further 5 minutes. Check the pH again. If it is then fairly similar, the fish can then be released into the aquarium. If it is still far off, repeat the process again until you get the pH roughly right. Particularly if you've got a new aquarium that doesn't have any fish in it, it's a good idea to make sure the first ones you put in are cheap and small, because they really are the test guinea pigs. And if anything's going to go wrong, it's likely to go wrong to them. When you put your first set of fish into the aquarium, it's a good idea not to feed your aquarium for 1 or 2 days after the fish have been introduced, because the aquarium doesn't have the adequate amounts of bacteria to break down the waste from the fish. It's a really good idea when you first get your fish to add some of the bacteria products which are available, because the bacteria has to be established in your aquarium to keep the fish alive. So the fish produce the waste, the bacteria breaks down the waste. If you put the fish in first and wait for the bacteria to grow, there is a toxic period while you're waiting for that bacteria to establish. Now, there are some very effective products on the market which will actually give you the bacteria, so you don't have that toxic period while you're waiting for the bacteria to establish, to accommodate the amount of waste produced by your fish. The most common behaviour for new fish when you put them into the aquarium is to group together and generally hide amongst the rocks. As they establish themselves in the aquarium, what they'll be trying to do is secure territories in the aquarium in which they create little homes out of. So don't try and sort of chase them out of the rocks or expect them to come out within the first couple of days or weeks. You will find as you introduce more fish into the aquarium, they become braver and will venture out more and will further associate you with food. So therefore, when they see you, they'll actually run to the front of the aquarium with time. Now the key to feeding is definitely variety of various pellets, flakes and frozen foods. Now the high in protein foods do make the fish grow very quickly, but it does tend to increase their aggression. The last thing you want is something that's really going to spark the aggression in them and makes them turn on each other more regularly. So if we feed all-purpose foods and veggie-based foods, we're in better stead than feeding the high protein ones. The fish tend to grow quickly anyway, so I wouldn't be too worried about that. Definitely no mammalian products. A lot of the old books will tell you to feed a lot of your fish beef heart and all those sorts of things. It's been proven that the amount of fats in them and that are just not good for the fish at all, and do tend to increase cases of hexamida, which is hole in the head disease, and there's other health problems that the mammalian products can actually cause. So that's your hearts and any meats from any terrestrial animals. In saying that, I also don't really recommend any terrestrial plants. Though the fish do actually eat it, it's been proven that the fish can't really break it down properly. High quality fish foods is really the key. So high quality flakes, high quality pellets and brine shrimp and other good frozen foods is really the way to go for selections of food. Now the amounts of foods is the next thing. The 30-second rule is a good guide. Feed your fish, you put a little bit of food into the aquarium, generally submersed under the water. You look at how long it takes your fish to eat the very last speck of food, and providing that's within 30 seconds, you're pretty much in good stead. You usually feed your fish 5 or 6 times a week. Generally better to feed them in the morning because they use most of their energy during the day. So you pretty much go to feed them every day, and if you forget once or twice a week, then that's fine. If you see your fish are getting a little bit of a belly, then definitely reduce the amount of food that's going into your aquarium. If you see that they're getting thin, then you definitely want to increase the amount of food that's going in the aquarium. And you really want to take that by the average fish. You'll always have one that's a little bit fat, you'll have one that's a little bit thin. This tank behind me, most of the condition of these fish are very good. They're all quite streamlined, they're not overly fat, and they're definitely not thin. Depending on the type of filter you have, it's really important that you replace your mechanical filtration medium regularly. The way that this works is you use a filter wool. The filter wool traps detritus out of the water, and the water is circled past this detritus several times an hour. So how regularly this filter is cleaned will determine how effective it is. If this filter medium is exported out of the aquarium and the detritus removes quickly, the general water quality of the aquarium will remain higher. On the other hand, if you leave your filter in there and it's disgustingly dirty and the water is circled past it several times an hour, it can actually decrease the water quality. Oh well, this one's definitely too dirty. It's really important that as soon as the filter wool starts to go even a light brown, you really want to throw it away, because that means it's trapped as detritus. So therefore, the quicker you get that detritus out of the aquarium, the better water quality you'll have. In this case, you can really see the amount of gunk that this filter has caught, and you can see the nice clean water getting circled past that gunk, which has by no means any beneficial effects on the aquarium itself. So cleaning the filter way before it gets to this stage is really important. What you'll need to clean your filter is a bucket, so you don't make a mess, and some replacement filter wool. The way that you clean out this particular filter is to simply peel off the filter wool, throw it into a bucket, get some replacement filter wool and return it back to the filter. In this case, you just slide the filter wool underneath the spray bar so the water seeps down through the filter material before it goes into the biological material, before it falls back into the aquarium. So with a model such as this one, which is very easy to clean, you just lift up the top, pull the sponge out, clean the sponge and return the sponge back to the top of the filter. Check that the biological medium is not clogged up with detritus. If it is, wash it in tank water and return the sponge back to the top of the filter again clean. So what you're trying to do is pass the water past the biological medium, so the biological medium can be growing bacteria, and pass the water via a mechanical filter which can take any detritus out of the water. How effective the biological filter is governed by how much capacity there is for biological filtration and what the medium you use for your biological filtration. So some mediums can't house much bacteria, other mediums house a lot of bacteria. So the more capacity you've got to grow bacteria, the more waste the filter can break down, and make sure that not too much detritus clogs up the filter, which will reduce its efficiency. Pre-filter or mechanical filter, how effective that is how regularly it's cleaned. With the larger canister style type filters, the amount of pre-filtration you've got is more, so therefore it doesn't need to be cleaned as regularly, but in principle, the more often a pre-filter is cleaned, the more effective it is. It's really important that you don't clean your biological medium with tap water, because tap water contains chlorine, and chlorine kills the bacteria in the media. And if there's no bacteria in the media, there's nothing to break down the fish's waste, which becomes toxic and will often kill the fish. Now the way that you do clean out your biological medium is you put it in a bucket, you siphon some water out of the aquarium into the bucket, you swish it around. You don't have to get it really clean, you just have to free up any detritus that's in the media which might cause it to clog. Then you simply put your media back into the filter again once it's clean. Now this is a really common situation. What's happened here is this filter's been running for quite a period of time. This is a hang on the back model filter, and what's happened is they've noticed that the filter is looking quite dirty because it hasn't been cleaned for a while. So the sponge was then thrown out. Now the sponge is what was keeping the aquarium pretty much alive and keeping the tank clear with the bacteria that was growing on the sponge. Now when the sponge was removed out under the impression that the sponge was too dirty, the bacteria which the tank was relying on was also removed. This aquarium also doesn't have much oxygen in it. Now that's a problem because the bacteria in the filter will be competing with the fish for the limited supplies of oxygen that's in the water. That will mean that the bacteria will be produced more slowly and will generally be less effective. If you go for a while and your sponge gets quite dirty, it's important to clean the sponge quite well in water from the fish tank, then put the sponge back in again and maybe clean it quite regularly for a period of time until you get the quality of the sponge back up again. Or if you are going to replace the sponge, add the sponge to the old sponge until there's enough bacteria on the new sponge to then remove the old sponge. So in this case, we're going to add some matrix as the main biological filter material. We're going to be using the sponge as a mechanical filter as it was intended. Now I'm just going to explain all about water quality for you. Besides temperature, the main thing an aquarium hobbyist needs to be concerned about is pH. Now this is not a big issue. Basically what we need to know is what pH does your fish like, and make sure that the pH of the fish which you're purchasing to go into your aquarium like a similar pH to the fish that you've got. With time, your aquarium tends to go acidic because the respiration from the fish and bacteria and waste produced by the fish will make the water acidic. Now typically most town tap water tends to be alkaline, so watch when you're doing your water changes that you don't shock the pH of your fish. There's many commercially available buffers on the market which will help you maintain a high pH or a steady pH, and the introduction of any corals, shells, coral sand, shell grit, anything calcium carbonate based will help to make sure that you do maintain a nice high pH. It's really important when you're altering any water quality, particularly pH, that you do it very gradually, because the fish become accustomed to the pH that you're in at the moment, and you must adjust it slowly. That accounts a lot of the time for why you have what seems to be a healthy aquarium at home. You buy a fish from the aquarium, you take it home, and then that fish dies. Often it's that the water quality in your home aquarium wasn't quite right. The water quality at the shop hopefully was. Then it's that individual has been shocked once it's been put into your aquarium. So it's not so much the water quality itself, it's more so the shock that's provided if you change your pH too quickly. So any buffers, any water changes, anything you're doing to alter pH, do it slowly and gradually over time for the safest results. Now essentially all the waste that goes into your aquarium comes from the fish food that you feed. So if you feed too much food in your aquarium, that is the only way that you're basically going to have too much waste in the aquarium. So you feed the food, which is proteins, amino acids and things. The fish will hopefully consume most of the food and will produce waste in the form of ammonia. Now the ammonia is released into the water or as a gas, and little bacteria grow in the filter, on the glass, on the rocks, on the gravel, on any hard surface, and this little bacteria called nitrosomnious bacteria will break the ammonia down into nitrite. Then nitrite is still quite toxic to the fish, ammonia being very toxic to the fish, which is the waste from the fish, then gets broken down by nitrobacter into nitrate. So you've got ammonia getting broken down into nitrite, which gets broken down into nitrate. Ammonia and nitrite are the higher level wastes, which are very toxic to your fish. Nitrate is not as toxic to the fish. Water changes and the presence of denitrification will help to get rid of nitrate, and having larger filters with more bacterial capacity is what gets rid of your ammonia and nitrite. The only time that you really need to be concerned about any of these organics in an aquarium is when you're putting in your fish too quickly. So the best advice I can give you is get small amounts of fish added on a regular basis with not too many going in at once to make sure that the amount of bacteria will be stable for the amount of waste being produced by your fish. The way that you get your water quality and clarity as crystal clear as this one is by making sure you've got plenty of filtration on your aquarium. Always overestimate on filtration. Make sure you always wash your filter material in water from the fish tank, not water from the tap, and don't overfeed. So if your water is a little bit cloudy, one thing to try is adding some of the bacterial agents which are available on the market, which increase the amount of bacteria in the aquarium, which will break down any organics and help to clear the aquarium. If that isn't working, you could also try putting in some activated carbon. Don't put the bacterial agents and the activated carbon in at the same time, because the carbon will suck out the bacterial agents, but in general carbon will clear the aquarium and take any odours out of the aquarium. Make sure you remove your carbon after about 1 month. Healthy plants consume low-level wastes like nitrates and phosphates, whereas unhealthy plants decompose and actually increase the amounts of nitrates and phosphates. Plants compete with algae for these low-level wastes as fertilizers. So basically the more plants you have in the aquarium, the less algae you'll tend to get in the aquarium, providing the conditions are desirable for the plants. There are many fish and chemicals that help to control algae, but increasing your water quality and decreasing the duration of light is the simplest way of controlling algae. Be aware of any fish that you put into the aquarium which will eat algae, because some of them will also eat the plants, and be really cautious with any chemicals which claim to reduce algae. Never overdose them. If anything, keep the dose rate as minimal as possible, and really look at these algae chemicals as being a last resort. So the key to having a crystal clear aquarium like this one is having plenty of filtration, plenty of aeration. Don't clean out your filter material with tap water, clean it with water from the fish tank, and don't overfeed your fish or have your lights on for too long a period of time. A really common point of confusion is how many litres you've got in your aquarium. To work out the literage of your aquarium, you just go length times height times width in centimetres divided by 1,000 gives you litres. And always know how many litres are in your aquarium and estimate how much water may be displaced due to rocks and gravel and so forth. Because when you're using any medications or dosing the aquarium, it's really important that you remember how many litres are in your aquarium. You wouldn't believe how many times problems have occurred to the tanks due to people overdosing various chemicals because they're not aware of how many litres are in the tank. One of the keys to having a good, healthy tank full of fish is to start with good, healthy fish. When you decide on the type of fish you want to keep, have a good understanding of what this fish should look like. Look to make sure that its eyes are nice and clean and clear, that you don't have any sort of white bacterial hazes over the eyes, which is generally a negative sign to water quality or the general health of the fish. Make sure the scales are well inlined and in good condition. Make sure the fins are of appropriate length, that are not all split. The eye of the fish should be in proportion to the rest of the body, meaning that if you look at various fish within the aquarium, how big the eye of the fish is relative to ones amongst that species will tell whether the fish has been stunted. If a fish has been stunted, it'll be quite a small fish. It'll have what seems to be a proportionately large eye. What you're really looking for is the proportion of the eye, whether the eye is swollen by any means, which could indicate like a bacterial infection, or the haze over the eye. You want the eye clean, clear and sharp. This particular fish is a silver shark, which has got a bacterial infection in its eyes. If you see this eventuating in any of your fish, make sure that your water quality is improved and add an antibacterial medication, and generally increase the amount of salt that's in the water. Make sure the fish are maintaining their position in the water very comfortably, which would be signifying that their swim bladder is intact. If the fish seems to be fighting to get to the bottom or doesn't look comfortable in the water column, you would definitely want to avoid that fish. Make sure when you're buying the fish that the fins, particularly the pectoral fins, are very clean and clear. Various diseases, fungal, bacterial and parasitic diseases very much show up on the pectoral fin of the fish. Make sure that the pectoral fin is clean and clear and that the fish is waving the pectoral fin comfortably, not performing erratic movements with the pectoral fin. That will generally indicate irritation of a parasitic nature. When you see them shimmying in one spot or scratching against the rocks, that may indicate that they have contracted a parasitic infection which will spread and develop. By far the most common problem that you'll experience would be white spot. White spot is a disease which is always present in the fish, just like a common cold. Now this white spot is a pathogen which in the event of stress will proliferate in the aquarium. So the way the white spot works is when the fish becomes stressed, the immune system of the fish goes down. The white spot will actually grow on the fish, leave the fish, reduplicate by the hundreds of million on a hard surface, then come back looking for a new host. Now, if it comes back and meets a host which is well established in the aquarium and has a good immune system, the equilibrium within the fish will control this basically with no problems. On the other hand, if it met a new fish or a fish which was significantly stressed due to either bad water quality, other fish in the aquarium bullying it, or anything else that may stress that particular fish, it will make the immune system of the fish lower, therefore more likely to contract the white spot. These parasites are very easy to identify. The fish will tend to breathe heavier, the fish will tend to be less active and look less comfortable in the water. It will flick and it will often just swim on the spot looking quite anxious or irritated. An easy physical way of seeing whether the fish have got white spot is During the more secondary phases of the infection, you'll easily see on the pectoral fin of the fish some very small white dots forming onto the fin of the fish. Along the rest of the fins is easy to see, even on the eye of the fish. As soon as you see this, you need to treat it with an anti-parasitic medication. There's many different brands available on the market which are really quite effective, providing you get the medication in there quickly and your water quality is relatively high and you don't have any carbon filters which will suck this medication out of the water. Generally, it's quite easy to control, and the earlier you get onto this disease, the easier it is to cure. It's really important to give it at least 2 weeks after you've totally cured the disease before you think about adding new fish to the aquarium, because white spot is a contagious disease. The new fish are quite likely to contract the disease as well. So white spot is quite common. The key is to be able to identify if they do get it, so therefore you can treat it. Treat it as soon as possible with what you understand to be the most effective medication which is available to you. Increase the amount of salt, then monitor your fish. In a healthy, happy aquarium, you'll find that breeding becomes a really regular occurrence. It's really quite easy to see when your fish are breeding because you'll recognise a dance that the male will do to try to attract the female. You'll also see that the male will often act quite aggressively when he's trying to breed, trying to assert his dominance. The main problem with breeding in a community aquarium is number one, crossbreeding, and second is that most of the babies just get eaten by the other fish. So it's really common for the fish to be breeding quite regularly and you not even know about it because the fish are just being eaten by the other ones. You can use breeding traps and other little isolation tanks to put the pregnant mothers in to allow the babies to come out in a safe environment, allowing you to raise them up. Breeding really is an enjoyable and rewarding part of the hobby. Do be cautious that if your fish are breeding well in your display tank, that they don't overpopulate your tank and put strain on your system, because your filtration may not handle all these new additions which are coming into the aquarium. It really is best to have a separate aquarium for your breeding, so you can put the right male and the right female, and you've got enough room to grow up your babies. And you could even look at selling these babies back to the shops.